Monsters under the bed, spiders, public speaking, or maybe it's failure or judgment or actually succeeding that you're afraid of. Now, fear is what keeps most people stuck. But the crazy thing is, some people say fear isn't real and it's just a feeling. Some people say it's just a feeling and it disappears the moment you take action. Well, let's talk about that. So, what are you afraid of? And what is that fear costing you?
Got it. Bill, you have way too much fun when the camera's not on.
I'm not going to have that kind of fun when the camera's off.
So, some people don't think fear is real, huh?
I think it's real.
I think it's a real thing. And I do agree with the fact that it is a feeling. It's an emotion. Something that is it feels very real. The same way any other emotion feels. So I believe that fear is very real. I do understand the point a little bit in that some fears, we make them so big that if we would just simply take some action, they do subside fairly quickly. But there's some real fears out there, though.
Okay, so real world context. What are you afraid of? What is your fear, Jamie? Do you have like a recurring fear or something like that?
I'm pretty fearless.
And we're
You know, I
and we're
think
done. We're
when
done now.
shortest podcast ever. Jamie's not fearful of anything, and there we go. So, I mean, I think I have some of the same, some of the same legitimate fears that a lot of people do. Of fear of failure. In fact, I think that's going to be a topic of for a podcast coming up in the future, probably. I mean, I think everybody has that one, or at least I know I do. I think there's also that just a fear: are you good enough? So a lot of those fears I think are kind of personal judgments of yourself, and whether you're qualified or whatever that is. But I think there's also those legit fears out there too, in terms of, I'm going to be walking down the street and some scary looking dog jumps out at me. Yeah, I mean, that's going to scare me a little bit too. I mean, not that I'm overly scared of dogs, but I have a healthy respect for dogs.
Now, would you call that fear or self-defense? A dog just jumps out at you. You're not afraid of dogs, but there's a dog coming at you, and you're just going, "Okay, I self-defense. I'm backing off." And your fear comes from not knowing what that dog is going to do, because some Chihuahuas out there, they are deadly.
Oh, trust me, I recognize that. Having a Jack Russell Chihuahua mix, yeah, I'm sometimes lay awake at night thinking the
And two
little
of them.
girl dog is going to, bite my throat out. Um, but I think that's a great question, right? Is like I think I have a healthy respect for, but both that and the fear of failure, fear of am I qualified? I think they both come back to a fear of the unknown, right? I mean, like I don't know what's going on with that dog, or I don't know what's happening with my project or the thing that I'm trying to come over. And sometimes some people get they get frozen. I mean, I've heard stories. I've never skydived myself, but I've heard stories where sometimes skydive instructors, when it's the very first time somebody is skydiving, they literally have to kind of push the person out, because they just they want to do it, but they just get so frozen in fear. So what are you afraid of, Bill?
I know personally, and this is a father-daughter thing. We're not afraid of each other, but we both have
Hope not.
right. We both have a fear of heights,
Uh,
and I call it a healthy fear of heights. I've learned to recognize my limitation with heights. So the first time my daughter discovered that she had a fear of heights was she was climbing up a ladder, totally strapped in for a high ropes course. First time on a high ropes course, she got up about 12 feet above ground, and she froze. She completely froze. She didn't go up, she didn't go down, and she could barely talk. It was just all of a sudden, what am I doing up here? Is this really fun? And I had to climb up the ladder and surround her and talk her down or talk her up. I gave her the choice, and she came down, and we talked her down. And then it wasn't but a year or so later that we found ourselves going to the Grand Canyon. And the Grand Canyon, you can walk right up to the edge. You can
Yeah.
just go up to the edge and dive off if that's what you wanted to do. And she got a real, a real fear of that. And we're looking at the Grand Canyon. You have to take a look at the Grand Canyon. And we sat about 10 feet from the edge of the Grand Canyon and had a long father-daughter talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, later on when she was in college, I went down to Peru. She decided she would go down to Peru and meet me after a week, and we'd take a week's holiday together, just her and I, and we'd hike the Inca Trail, go through the Sun Gate to Machu Picchu, which is cool. It's really high. It's really high. And the Inca Trail, you've got cliff up one side and cliff down the other side. And you got a trail. Trail maybe 8 foot. At, you know, not much of a problem. But yeah, fear of heights.
When you're standing there on the edge, sure.
Yeah.
So is fear, are there legitimate fears and not so legitimate fears?
I think when you're afraid of stuff that hasn't happened yet, it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
So what are you afraid of? Because your mind's going through this whole idea of, well, this could happen and this could happen and this could happen. But what about that could happen too? But what if they all happen together, but we skip number three? And you just
See,
you talk yourself into a paralysis.
but you mentioned something though that I think is really interesting though, is that you have a fear of heights, but you have a healthy fear of heights,
Yes, I
or
will
it's a healthy dose of respect. So is respect and fear the same thing?
respect and fear. I don't know that I can put those two together, to be honest with you. When I say I have a healthy respect, it's saying I know my limitations. Like if I have to get up on the roof to fix something, I can get up on the roof to fix something, but don't expect me to do it quickly.
Okay.
Just
So
like
what does this even matter? Why does it even matter? Why does it matter that we're talking about fear?
I think because too many people let fear stop them from starting a business or even making a podcast or going live streaming online or talking to somebody. uh, You know, uh, I mean,
It controls their decisions, right?
it controls their decisions, and in some effect, it controls their productivity and can control their future if you want to get really really long term.
Mhm.
When I talk about a healthy respect for heights, I don't let it stop me. If I think it's going to stop me, I'll get somebody else to do it for me. If it's something along the line of doing something on the roof, if I don't think I can do it, someone else is going to do it.
So what kinds of things does fear end up controlling in people's lives, you think? So you mentioned a couple, afraid of starting a business, afraid of starting a podcast, afraid of, doing something else. But what are some other things that you think that people fear ends up controlling in their life?
Making decisions.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have that one. I have that one.
I thought
I
I'd.
don't like deciding. I don't like deciding where we're going to go eat. I'm afraid I'll make the wrong decision.
Who decides whether it's the wrong decision? Oh, wait a sec. We're married. We know the answer to
We're-
that.
yeah, we already know the answer to
We
that.
already know. We already know the answer to that. Uh,
I think it's true though. I mean, I think people stay in jobs, and I think people quit jobs out of fear. Um,
yeah,
Stops them kind of pursuing, you know, something that they've always wanted to do, dreams, things like that.
yeah. They're afraid that if they lose their job, they won't find another one.
Mhm.
They're afraid that if they start the job, they can't meet expectations. They're afraid that if they put too much money into something to try and create something online, that it won't work and they're out the money.
You think they just people settle then?
Oh yeah, people
Like
settle.
like the fear keeps me from pursuing something, and as a result, I just kind of settle with what I have.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just settling. It's It's safer that way, Jamie. It's safer that we settle.
So, so, so what, I mean, how can we help people? Like if you're afraid, if you right now, like you have something that you're afraid of,
Okay, let me talk.
um,
Let me toss some things at you. Okay, agree, disagree, or comment. How's that? Uh,
got it.
Fear's a liar.
I agree for the most part. I think a lot of the fears that we have are unfounded and they become bigger the more we think about them and the more we give some sort of credibility to them, the bigger they get. And I think most of the time, the things that we're afraid of never materialize anyway.
Okay, I can work with that. Next statement: your brain wants to protect you.
That I keep hearing that, but I don't think my brain does. I think my brain tries to kill me sometimes. Um, no, our brains are designed, right? They recognize that, that there are things, and it's everything from causes us to not take action and things like that because it wants to preserve our energy. That's what our design is really, that's what our brain is trying to do is, and if we actually exert energy and then we need energy, we may not have it. So I think, but our brain also tries to, some of that energy we're talking about is, well, what if I try this and I get embarrassed? Or what if I try this and I'm not good enough? Or what if I try this and I truly fail and then I have all of the emotional side of the failure coming about? So our brain just tells us that's good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think the brain, or I believe the brain wants us to, or the brain wants to protect us physically, and sometimes I would think emotionally. I'm not a rocket surgeon or a brain scientist, but it would be kind of along that line. The brain is designed to protect us, and sometimes
And I think,
go
or
ahead.
go ahead. So there's a part of that too that I've read where um, our conscious and our unconscious, or I'm sorry, our unconscious mind cannot tell the difference between real and made up stuff. So I think sometimes our brain protects us from that unconscious space, and it doesn't know if it's actually real or not.
Well,
It just perceives it as it's a threat, so therefore I need to protect.
yeah. And I think most people have a fear of the future.
Hmm?
I mean, before the election, everybody was afraid that somebody would win, and there were a lot of people that were afraid somebody would lose, and there were a lot of people that were afraid that if they didn't care, something would happen. And stuff is, I mean, stuff is happening. And my wife has this great. She works with a particular type of clientele as a healthcare provider, and she deals a lot with their worry. And she basically says, as a political thing, she says, you need to stop worrying about who's going to be this or who's going to be that, because I've lived through so many presidents now, and I'm still just going along. I'm still just working along. Whether it was this
Still here.
president or that president or another president, if we take care of ourselves first, you're going to see how things are going to work out. And instead of
Very
just
true.
going off on some fear thing. Have you ever heard of exposure therapy? I'm
Um,
not talking about ice baths.
then no. Uh, all I know about it is like it's more of like the things that you do more often, you expose yourself to something, the easier it gets. So I think from a fear perspective, like if you face the things that you're afraid of, it starts to have less of a grip on you.
Yeah, so like the more you face fear, the less power it has over you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think there's some legitimacy to that. I think especially some of those made up fears.
Oh yeah.
Your fear of height, if you spent more time going up and getting up feet off the ground, it may get to the point where you're not as worried, concerned, afraid of it. But I think those kinds of fears, I don't know as though you ever get over those completely.
Right, right.
And I don't know as though you should, right? You mentioned before you have a healthy respect for it.
Mm.
You know your limitations, and I think that's valuable for us. Um, But I think one thing that we fail to do is like when we're feeling afraid to do something, then we kind of need to make a pros cons list. It's like, what's the worst thing that could happen if I do this? But also, if I do it, what could be what could be the positive outcome? And kind of weigh the pros and cons of it.
A lot of people fear rejection, so they don't ask.
Okay? And I had a mentor one time say the answer is always no unless you ask.
Got to ask, you know.
Gotta ask. So, what are some of the takeaways as we kind of wrap this up? What's the takeaway, and what do we get? What kind of homework are we going to give our listeners for this one, Bob? Or you're not Bob, you're Bill. You've always been Bill. I don't know if you've ever been Bob.
If I ever have another dog, and I will have another dog, the dog's name is Bob. My wife is adamantly against that because it'll probably be a female, but that's beside the point. Uh, takeaway: identify one fear that you know is holding you back. Write it down. What is one thing? Don't pick 20 fears. Just pick one thing that you know is just kind of holding you back. I'm afraid I'm afraid I'm gonna fail. Okay. For us, this is podcast number 3. Wait until you hear us at podcast 75, and see how much better we've become because we didn't let fear stop us from starting this crazy podcast that we absolutely love already. But identify one thing that's holding you back. That's one thing. Another thing is, again, like you just mentioned, what's the worst that could happen? And for most things, it's not about the house burning down, unless you're thinking about, should I do a campfire in my living room? Okay, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, so we're not talking about stuff like that. But 99% of the time, it's not life or death. What's the worst that can happen? So you lose a few $100 or even a few $1,000. That might be
Yeah.
might be devastating to a few people, but to most of us, probably not. So that's another thing. What do you got? What's another takeaway, Jamie?
I think sometimes it's just do it anyway, right?
Do it anyway.
Like the idea of like I just need to the exposure therapy thing. Like, okay, I recognize this, I am afraid of this, but I'm going to do it anyway, and just kind of create that mindset of I'm just going to do it, and then kind of talk yourself through what you just said. I'm just going to do it, and what's the worst thing that could happen? But think about it from like a goal setting perspective. They always tell you that when you're setting goals, you need to have some like small action steps. Don't try to take off, to accomplish the whole goal all at one
Right.
time. So almost break it down to say, okay, well, I am afraid of doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And the worst thing that can happen is this, and I can accept that. And then my very first step, the one thing I'm going to do is going to be this, and then just create that one small step, and then just do it.
Just build on it.
So I think those are pretty good action steps. And I think the other thing too is I've got to learn to celebrate. Like once I recognize that I've actually done it and it didn't kill me, then hey, pat yourself on the back.
Yeah.
Take a little bit of, be proud that hey, in the past this has held me back, but it didn't today.
Yeah. My mind went to a very weird place. I'm afraid of losing weight. And if I lose 5 pounds, I'm going to celebrate with a box of Oreos.
Well, how else would you celebrate?
Oh, there's no argument from you about that. Okay, that's right. Which again is just a little off the concept of what we're talking about. So, the final thing is this: is identify the fear, and then take steps to face that fear. That whatever that one thing is that you've identified, actually start to do something about it, and forget about the consequences. It's going to be okay. If you fail, guess what? I'm leaning in. It's good. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It really is. Failing is, well, I have no idea who said it, but I've read it several places. We've probably said it to each other a few times. If you're not failing, you're not even trying. Maybe we should leave it at that. If you're not failing, you're not even trying.
I like that. I mean, we're all afraid of something, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But can you fight through the fear and do it anyway?
Absolutely. But you got to do it.
So if you have something that you're facing the fear with and you want to take our steps, take our advice a little bit and try something, reach out to us and let us know how that went. Or if you want any advice, further advice, coaching, we got you, got where Bill and I both are happy to help you with that as well. So until next time, that is Bill McConnell.
That is Jamie French.